Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's me, Mario. Welcome back to the stream. I can hear feedback. Is that Give me one sec, guys. I don't like hearing myself talk, but I can hear myself talk somewhere. Okay. I don't hear myself anymore. I never like hearing myself talk. I sound weird. But what's up, everybody? You guys in chat can't even see my mustache. So when I said, it's a me, Mario, you guys don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. But I got a nice virtual mustache on right now, and damn, does it look good. What's up, everybody? Good morning again. Welcome back and happy hump day, aka Wednesday, September 4th, 2024. We are back ready to attack you. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to an amazing day in the market. We had a really good start to September. Yeah, that was a great start. We absolutely dumped to the downside. We have some great volatility. There's a lot of opportunity. And I'm looking forward to taking advantage of the opportunity with you guys. So we're going to start the rundown show. We're going to break everything down, talk about what we got going on for the day. So you guys are dialed in, prepared, and ready to crush it. So let's not waste any time. Actually, we're going to dive into it. But first, good morning, everybody. Craig, Alex, Catherine, Chelsea, Stir, and everybody else inside the chat. Again, good morning and welcome back. And if you want to, go ahead and open your mic in the Zoom and just shout a big old good morning if you're feeling up to it. And then we'll dive into it. Woo!
Good morning.
Morning, Julie. Catherine, Logan, Aaron, what's going on? Good morning, guys. So now we can officially dive into it. We're going to start with the economic calendar. As always, talk about what we got going on for today. The only thing that we have coming on up is going to be JOLTS job openings data at 10 o'clock. And yes, this is the type of data that can move the market. I remember one session we're in the market, it's coming up on 10 o'clock, thinking about a trade, long, and I'm like, no, we got data, JOLTS data in 2 minutes. Let's not really take this exceptional long. And then literally after JOLTS data, the market dumped 8 points. So yeah, be super mindful of JOLTS. It's definitely market moving data. It can be. That's set to be released at 10 o'clock. Be mindful of that. And again, we've seen some pretty big movement in the market before through JOLTS data. So that's at 10 o'clock. Again, other than that, you are pretty much in the clear for the rest of the day. So let's talk about what we got going on with the SPY and the Qs. And we will also discuss NVIDIA for today as well. So you guys know the deal. Go ahead and get all of your tickers typed up inside of the Market Mastery chat room. When I'm done reviewing the SPY, the Qs, and NVIDIA, I'll have an opportunity to look at your stocks as well for today. So here with the SPY, let's start on the daily and let's go through and highlight these key zones that we'll be looking at today. Then we'll jump into a 5-minute time frame and build some plans. All right, so go ahead and mark up this gap here on the SPY. You got a big old daily gap here. Top end of this daily gap is at 548.92. And the bottom end of the gap is at 544.94. Keep in mind that at the top end of the gap also lays the 50 SMA, right? So the 50 SMA is actually to the penny at the same exact price level as the top end of the gap at 548.92. So that's going to be a nice little barrier of support because we're above it right now. We could see a nice little bounce off the top end of that gap because we also have the 50 SMA to help support this as well. So just be mindful of that. And again, you got the bottom end of the gap. I would also go ahead and just as a reference, mark up yesterday's low of day and mark up yesterday's close. Just as reference, and we'll see how we move around those 2 points here today when we open on up. Because if we really look left and look up at our next area of resistance, our next key area of resistance on the daily is not until we get back up towards around 554.68 to 555.06. So that's a key zone of overhead resistance here on the SPY. But again, mark up yesterday's low and close with a couple lines just as reference to see if we respect those levels today. I mean, we could bounce off the top end of the gap, off the 50 SMA. We could come close the gap from the gap down this morning. Looks like we're going to be gapping down. Right? And we could get rejected off yesterday's close and then roll. So it's very important to go ahead and be mindful of the previous day, low, and close, at least for today's session. So you got your top zone of resistance. We're marking up yesterday's low and close. We have this big old daily gap. And then the last thing that I want you to do is mark up this smaller gap way down here. That's between 535.73 to 536.30. Just go ahead and mark it up, right? I don't think we're going to get there today. You never know, though. Anything can happen, but that would be a massive drop. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think the lowest we get, if we have another down day, it's the bottom end of that gap, right around 544.94. But again, just be mindful. There is another gap way down here, and we could fill it, at some point. And so that's kind of getting you close to the golden pocket on this daily fib retracement as well. So if you go ahead and take a fib retracement from this swing low into this swing high, we got that little gap way down here, which is also very close to that 50% retracement. And we could see a healthy 50% retracement before seeing more upside. And again, we do have that lower gap that could get filled. So just be mindful of that. But again, the main areas that we will be looking at today is going to be this daily gap here that we just discussed. Bottom end of the gap is at 544.94. Top end of the gap is at 548.92. It's also where the 50 SMA is at. And then your top zone of resistance is up between 554.68 to 555.06. Now we go down to a 5-minute time frame. The last thing that I want to do here as well is I want to take a fib extension from yesterday's high a day into yesterday's low a day, and then back up into yesterday's high a day. Oh my goodness, would you look at that, right? The 50% retracement just so happens to line up with all of that daily resistance. So I like that. So that's going to be a very key level of resistance if we get there today. It's also up against the 50% extension from yesterday's swing high to yesterday's swing low. Okay, so let's go ahead and build some plans. Right? Plan number one is if the SPY gets all the way up into that daily zone of resistance, as well as that 50% extension. Okay, if we see it come all the way up and we start topping out at that level, that's an area where we would look to get short, right? At that point in time, we'll have some intraday profit target levels. If we rip all the way up into that level, we could look left and we can gauge some intraday PT levels. But we already know that if we get short off that top zone, right, stops go right above it. And there could be some really nice downside. So that's going to be game plan number one, is if the SPY gets up into that daily zone of resistance, as well as the 50% extension from yesterday, and if we top out and see a short opportunity presenting itself up at that zone. That'll be a very, very key level to get short off of. Okay, that's game plan number one. Game plan number two is if the SPY opens, comes down to the top end of the daily gap, as well as the 50 SMA, and if we see it hold as intraday support. So if we see the SPY supporting off that daily 50 SMA and the top end of that gap at 548.92, I'm looking to get long, right? Where to? Well, the first target would have to be yesterday's low a day. So if we get long at 548.92, we would have to be willing, right, to look to take some profits off of yesterday's low of day at 549.52. If we struggle at that level, if we're having a hard time getting above it. But if we just get above it with ease, your main target's going to be yesterday's close at 552.08. So that's going to be game plan number two, getting long off the top end of the daily gap in the 50 SMA. If we hold above it as intraday support, first target would have to be yesterday's low of day. But realistically, if we hold all of that support and bounce, I think there's going to be realistic opportunity to at least get up to close the gap into yesterday's close of 552.08. And if we get above yesterday's close of 552.08, I think we have realistic potential to see the SPY getting back up towards around that 554.68 to 555.06 level. That's going to be game plan number two. And then your final game plan, number three, is going to be if we get inside of the daily gap. So if we crack the top end of the daily gap and we fall below the daily 50 SMA and we see a proper intraday back test off all of that daily resistance and we validate a short here intraday, let's get short for a daily gap fill opportunity. We could look to short this on down to the bottom end of the gap at 544.94 here on the SPY. Game plan number three. And then your final game plan would be if we actually fill the gap today. If we fill the gap, we could look for a gap fill bounce opportunity. That's going to be game plan number four. So we have four ideas, four realistic things that could set up, that could play out. We just need one of the four to validate. That's it. We've got four great ideas, four realistic things that could absolutely play out today. We just need one of the four to actually validate. So I'm pretty optimistic for today. I like where the market's at. I like these levels. I think there's going to be some great opportunity to take some amazing A-plus trades. And when you take amazing A-plus trades, guess what happens? You typically make money, right? A byproduct of that is your account grows. So that's the SPY for today. If you have any questions, let me know. More than happy to run back through that, but you guys should be all set here. Let's go into the Qs. Talk about what we got going on with QQQ here. I would do the same exact thing with the Qs like we did with the SPY. Go ahead and mark up yesterday's low of day and yesterday's close with just a couple standard lines as reference to see, are we respecting those two areas here today, right? Then your next area of resistance is not going to be until you get back up into this region right here on QQQ. That's going to be up between 467.89 to 468.43. And that level really stands out as a very key significant level. So that's going to be our most significant area of resistance for today here on QQQ. Again, that's between 467.89 to 468.43. We do have this teeny little gap here on QQQ as well. That's between 454.44 to 455.75. We got that little gap here. And then when you run a fib retracement from swing low to swing high, look at that gap level and look at that fib. Surprisingly, the bottom end of that gap just so happens to be a 50% retracement. So that's definitely an area that we could see a nice bounce. If the Qs come down and fill the gap today, we could see a gap fill bounce. It would also be balancing off the 50% retracement level. That's going to be a key level of some support if we get down there today, right? So you got that daily gap to the downside. It lines up with your 50% retracement. And if we see the Qs falling below the 50% level and below this little gap, there could be a little bit more downside. And I would see some potential down towards around this 448.61 to 449.55 level here on QQQ. Right, so you got your two lower areas of support, one of those being a gap up against the 50% retracement level. You're marking up yesterday's low of day and close. And then we have our main area of resistance up overhead. Last thing that we need to do as well is take a fib extension from yesterday's swing high into yesterday's swing low. Drag that bad boy back up into yesterday's swing high. And that's right around the golden pocket. Based on that upper zone that we just discussed, it's in line with that fibs golden pocket here. It's actually more up against the 38.2, but the bottom part of that zone right against that golden pocket based on that fib extension. But let's do this. I can't even see that fib extension. So let's drag it out a little bit into yesterday, back to a 5-minute. Now we can clearly see it. All right, so that's where we need to start there. All right, so let's go ahead and build a couple game plans. Right now, the Qs appear to be gapping down underneath yesterday's low of day. Yesterday's low of day was at 459.41. So really just want to watch that area to see if the Qs are respecting it, if we have good price action around it, if there's even any opportunity to take any kind of trade off that level. Right, so really just watch this 459.41 level. And I mean, if we have a proper break and retest off that level and we can back it with another one or two reasons intraday to get long on a break and retest back above yesterday's low of day, I would consider playing the Qs long at least into yesterday's close, right, to fill the gap up around 461.82. That's me game plan number one, but you need to back that with as many separate reasons as possible. Just because it breaks yesterday's low of day and looks to be holding it, I wouldn't just get long just based on that reason alone. I would want at least one or two other reasons to back that trade up. And if we have those things present, let's get long into yesterday's close. Okay, that's game plan number one. If we come up into yesterday's close and we fill that gap and we get rejected at 461.82, let's look for a short, expecting to see some downside off of a gap fill rejection today on the Qs. That'll be game plan number two, is if we come up and close the gap down into yesterday's close. Again, that's at 461.82. That'll be game plan number two. And then the other game plan I'll leave you with is going to be if we come down into that lower gap level, right? Because right now we're still pretty far off from that lower gap, and we're definitely far away from the upper area of resistance. It makes no sense to build a plan off top resistance. We may not even get there. So I would say the last plan that we should have built, and another idea that we should consider, is if we just start to drop on off into that lower gap. So let's say we have a lot of intraday resistance forming off like yesterday's low, for example. We could look to get short down to the top end of the gap. That's realistic. And if we ever come down and fill this gap, it's also the 50% retracement on the daily, right around that 454.44. So if we ever see the Qs filling the gap today, we can expect a gap fill bounce. We could also expect to see more buyers than sellers present up against that daily 50% level. So that's going to be like game plan number 3/4, right? Game plan 3 is, can we get short into the bottom end of the gap, into that 50% level? We can. Maybe we have a lot of resistance forming up against yesterday's low of day, and maybe we have an A+ trade presenting itself off yesterday's low to get short down into the bottom of the gap. That's a possibility. That's plan number 3. And then the final plan is, if we actually get into that gap level today and fill it, I think we could see some kind of a bounce, right? And we would also be bouncing off that 50% level. I think that's a high probability area to be looking for a long here on the Qs today. So that's your fourth and final plan here on the Qs. All right. And then lastly, maybe some NVIDIA price, some NVIDIA action. I don't know. There's a couple things that I see. The first thing that I see is this little gap right here on NVIDIA between 105.64 up to, and I could probably readjust this a little bit. Yeah, let's readjust it. Let's get it right to the penny into that gap up low a day. And let's adjust this right into that candle open. All right, so it's 105.64 up to 106.26. And the other thing to be mindful of is the top end of that daily gap is also where the 61.8 retracement is. Right? And if you go look at NVIDIA on a 5-minute time frame, what are we doing in pre-market? I mean, we're really respecting that gap level. I mean, beautifully, right? We come below it, we get above it, we push, we hold it as support, we crack below it, we retest it, we get back above it, hold it as support, we push, hold the top into support, we crack below it, hold the bottom into support, top end resistance, bottom end support, top end resistance. I mean, we definitely see great movement around that tight little teeny gap here on NVIDIA. And again, it's right up against that daily 61.8 fib retracement. So that's a key area that I'm watching today here on NVIDIA. It's like if we hold all of that lower support and we see a great intraday setup suggesting a phenomenal long off all that support, again, I would consider getting long here on NVIDIA today. And my first area to the upside would have to be yesterday's low a day, number 1, and then into yesterday's close to fill the gap right around 108. Right, so let's go ahead and build those plans, guys. Right, if we hold that 105.64 level and we hold it as great support, right, we could start to look for some longs, expecting a push and a bounce out of that daily gap. Right, where to? At least back up into yesterday's low of day. That's at 107.29. That'll be your first target. And then if we break above yesterday's low of day, I mean, why wouldn't we come up to fill the gap? Super realistic. We could see NVIDIA come up and close the gap into yesterday's close at 108. And that would be your final target today here on NVIDIA. So game plan 1, do we see a proper long setting up off the bottom end of that daily gap at 105.64? If so, maybe we get a nice gap fill bounce back up into yesterday's low of day, and then maybe back up into yesterday's close to close the gap. Game plan 1. If we ever see NVIDIA coming up and closing that gap at 108, what could we see? A nice little gap fill rejection opportunity. So that's going to be game plan number 2, is looking for a possible short right around 108 here on NVIDIA for a possible little gap fill rejection. All right, so that's my 2 plans here with NVIDIA today. And that's really all I'm focused on, guys, right? There's some other decent opportunity out there, but the SPY looks great. The Qs look great. And NVIDIA looks really good as well. I have 3 great looking stocks. I have multiple plans on all of these different stocks. There's like 10 different things that could validate. I have 10 potentials, right? 10 potential plans across these 3 stocks. I just need one to present itself, one to validate itself, and that be that one and done A+ trade. So there's no need for me to place my focus anywhere else to bring on more distractions. I like the SPY, I like the Qs, I like NVIDIA. I think there's great opportunity with those 3 stocks, and all of my focus goes on those 3 stocks today to make sure I'm not missing any A+ setups and I'm having a really good day in the market. All right, so that's the rundown, baby. Those are the best 3 for today. Those are my game plans. We are all set, ready to rock and roll. But what are you guys looking at today? We got about 6 minutes to market open. Is there anything on your watch list that I can review for you guys? Yes, if you guys are on TikTok and you're like, I can't see your screen, I understand that. Go click the link in my profile here on TikTok. That'll take you over to YouTube. And Monday through Friday from 9 to 9:30, you can actually watch the rundown over on YouTube.
DocuSign.
DocuSign's one to look at?
Earnings, Tom brought it to my attention, but earnings are tomorrow, I believe.
Okay.
So there's a chart up there, but potential plays
tomorrow.
to be on watch from watch into today into tomorrow. Nothing really like jumping out at the moment, but if we do get to supply or demand, I'm definitely excited for that.
Yeah, and their earnings are tomorrow after the close? Yeah, tomorrow night. Michael on YouTube, what's up, brother? Good morning. What news is coming out at 10? You got some data. You got JOLTS job openings data that's being released here at 10 o'clock today. And that's a market-moving piece of data. And we just don't know how the market's going to react. And so if you're in a trade, hard stops in the system. If you're considering taking a trade, a minute out of data at 10 o'clock, I would just pass on the trade altogether, wait for data to drop, see how the market reacts, go from there. Does anybody got anything else? We still have about 5 minutes till market open.
Hey Josh, I missed your SPY. I had to step away for a second, but I have a couple levels. I wanted to see if maybe you thought maybe I was kind of spot on with them.
Let's see it.
I got 554.13 to 555.11.
Let me put that up. You said 554.13?
Yep, to 555.11.
To 555.11. So the top end of your zone is the top end of my zone. So you're dialed in with that. The bottom end of your zone, I'm trying to see where you got the touch points, and I can see your touch points. You're looking to capture that candle low, it looks like from July 8th, and then capture that candle high from July 19th. I would say your zone is valid, but I would also say we could strategically tighten that zone up, right? I don't like big dollar zones. Anything can happen in that dollar region. I like to find significant, like under 50-cent tight zones, right? Because there's more that I can do inside those zones and better, in my opinion, opportunity and lower risk opportunity trades in those tighter zones. So if we can dial the zone in and tighten it up strategically without losing its validity, let's do it. But if we can't and we just have a dollar zone, then shit, we just have a dollar zone. But I would say we could readjust that on up a little bit to 554.68.
554.68.
Right, because whenever I drag it up to that level, I only really lose one touch point. So when I drag my level down to the bottom end where you had yours, I capture one more touch point. But if I tighten the zone up, right, it's still significant. I'm not taking away its validity, and I only lose that one touch point. So I can strategically tighten the zone up, still capture all of those touch points, and now I have a little bit of a tighter zone that I feel more confident to take some trades inside of. And mine's between 554.73 up to 555, pretty much 11, right where you had yours.
Okay, cool.
So your zone's valid, 100%. Now, the next step is, how can we tighten those up strategically to have the tightest, most significant zones possible? And so I would bring mine up to that point because I only lose that one touch point right here, that low a day, but I still capture 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 really valid touch points on the daily off that tighter zone. If you look at the 5-minute yesterday, because like if you look at the daily, yesterday's daily candle, it's just one big red candle through the zone. You don't get a touch point off that zone from the daily. But when you go into a 5-minute time frame, did you see good price development off that zone yesterday? You did.
Right.
Beautifully. So that validates that zone based on yesterday's movement around the zone when we have no clarity from just that daily chart. So the 5-minute validates, that's the zone that I want to go with, between 554.73 to 555.07.
All right, cool.
Does that make
Thank you,
sense?
sir. Yes, sir.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. We got less than a minute. Market's open. Let's get it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go grab our hedgies for the day. We always